Her name was Emily, and mine is Jake. Emily was the kind of woman who could light up a room without even trying. She had this way of making everyone around her feel like they were the most important person in the world. I noticed her in college, her bright red hair catching the sunlight like fire, her laugh bouncing through the crowded cafeteria. I couldn't believe she even noticed me. I was the quiet guy, the nice guy, but somehow she did. We started talking over coffee one day after a shared class. I spilled a drink on myself like an idiot, and she laughed so hard I thought she'd choke. That moment sealed it. By the end of our first real conversation, I was hooked. She was sharp-witted, endlessly curious, and impossibly kind. Falling for her felt as easy and natural as breathing. We dated for 3 years. Friends called us inseparable. Jake and Emily. Always one word. Like we were some kind of duo in a sitcom. Marriage was inevitable. And in the summer of 2010, I stood under a canopy of white flowers and promised her forever. I meant every word. I believed every word. The first 2 years were perfect. Well, as perfect as life gets. We lived in a little rental house with creaky floors and chipped countertops. We ate frozen pizzas on the couch, binged bad TV shows, and argued about things like how much money to save or who forgot to buy toilet paper. She was my best friend, my teammate in this messy thing called life. Looking back, I should have known. I should have seen the small cracks in the glass before it shattered. But when you're happy, when you're in love, you don't look for warning signs. You just think, this is it. Until the day it wasn't. It started with small changes, so small that I ignored them at first. Emily began staying late at work more often. She'd come home tired, distracted, and when I asked about her day, her answers were clipped, vague. It was fine. Nothing exciting, she'd say, brushing past me with a kiss on the cheek before disappearing into the bedroom. I didn't think much of it. I chalked it up to stress. Her job as a marketing coordinator had always been demanding. Emily had this relentless drive to prove herself, and sometimes that meant burning the candle at both ends. I told myself she was just working hard, that I should be proud of her. Then there were the texts. She'd started guarding her phone, something she'd never done before. She'd turn it face down on the table or slip it into her pocket as soon as it buzzed. Once, while we were watching a movie, her phone lit up, and she grabbed it like it was on fire. I glanced at the screen, just a glimpse, but it was enough to see the name. Mike. Who's Mike? I asked, trying to sound casual. Oh, just an old friend from college, she said without missing a beat. He's going through a rough patch. I'm just being there for him. That answer should have been enough. I wanted it to be enough. But something about the way she avoided my eyes stuck with me. I didn't press it, though. I trusted her. She was my wife, for God's sake. What kind of man doesn't trust his wife? But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I don't know if it was instinct or paranoia, but one night, when she was asleep, I picked up her phone. My heart was racing, pounding so loud I was sure it would wake her. I hated myself for it. I wasn't that guy, the one who snooped, but my gut told me something was off. Her phone was locked. Of course it was. Emily had never had a password before. That night I didn't sleep. I lay next to her, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in 1,000 directions. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that I was overthinking. But the next day, when she told me she was going to visit her sister for the weekend, the doubt came roaring back. Her sister lived 2 hours away, and Emily packed in such a rush that it felt off. She was jittery, checking her phone repeatedly as she threw clothes into a bag. I'll call you when I get there, she said, giving me a quick hug before walking out the door. That weekend I went crazy. I spent hours pacing the living room, staring at my phone, waiting for her call. She didn't call. I texted her, "Everything okay?" and got a one-word response hours later. Yeah, something was wrong. I knew it in my bones. When she came home on Sunday night, her energy was different. It was like she was floating on a cloud, lost in her thoughts, smiling to herself at nothing in particular. She didn't look like someone who had spent the weekend with family. She looked like someone who'd just come back from a dream. Did you have a good time? I asked, forcing a smile. "Yeah," she said softly, unpacking her bag. It was nice to see everyone. It was then that I noticed a small red mark on her neck. A bruise, faint but unmistakable. "Emily?" I said, my voice low. "What is that?" Her hand flew up to her neck, covering it. "Oh, this? It's nothing. I must have bumped into something. You know how clumsy I am." She laughed. But I didn't. For the first time in our marriage, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. A part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand answers. But another part of me, the part that loved her so deeply, was too afraid of what I might hear. So I stayed silent. That night, I lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe softly beside me. And that's when it hit me. She's lying to me. It was the first time I let myself think it. Really think it. My wife, the woman I had promised to spend my life with, was hiding something from me. And deep down, I already knew what it was. The days that followed were pure torment. Doubt consumed me like a sickness, gnawing at every corner of my mind. Emily acted normal, too normal. She'd hum to herself while making dinner, laugh at the TV, and kiss me goodnight as if everything was perfectly fine. But I couldn't unsee the bruise on her neck or forget the name Mike glowing on her phone. I had to know. I don't know what pushed me to do it, but the next Saturday, when Emily said she was running errands, I followed her. I felt pathetic, like some paranoid, jealous husband in a bad movie, but I couldn't stop myself. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out as I tailed her beat-up Honda Civic through the back streets of town. She didn't go to Target. She didn't go to the bank. She drove straight to a small diner on the edge of town. And there he was. I saw him through the window before she even parked. A man sitting in a booth, nervously checking his phone. He was tall, dark-haired, and younger than I expected, probably mid-20s. Emily slid into the booth across from him like it was the most natural thing in the world. She smiled that smile I thought was mine alone, the one that could melt you from across a room. I sat in my car, staring at them, my hands white-knuckling the steering wheel. They were close, too close. Emily leaned in as he talked, brushing her hair behind her ear, tilting her head just slightly like she always did when she was flirting. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. But I had to see more. I grabbed a baseball cap from the back seat, pulled it low over my face, and walked into the diner. The place smelled like burnt coffee and grease. I slid into a booth far enough away to not get noticed but close enough to watch. My stomach churned as I saw them laugh together. Emily throwing her head back, her eyes sparkling like they used to when we first met. Mike reached across the table and touched her hand. Just for a moment, but it was enough. She didn't pull away. I don't know how long I sat there, seething, before Emily noticed me. She turned her head, mid-laugh, and froze. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a second we were both statues. Then her face went pale, and she quickly yanked her hand away from Mike's. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stood up, shaking. I couldn't do this. Not here, not in front of some stranger. Without saying a word, I turned and walked out of the diner. My legs felt like jelly, and my vision blurred as I stumbled back to the car. "Jake, wait!" I heard her voice behind me. Her footsteps hurried on the gravel lot. I spun around just as she reached me. "Who is he?" I hissed, my voice low and dangerous. "Don't lie to me, Emily." She looked like a deer in headlights. "It's not what you think." "Who is he?" I shouted this time. He's just a friend," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Jake, please, I can explain." "A friend? You're holding hands with him in a diner and laughing like he's the center of your world. And you want me to believe he's just a friend?" She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For a moment, we just stared at each other in the parking lot. Her face painted with guilt, mine twisted with betrayal. Finally, I broke the silence. "How long has this been going on?" She flinched like I'd slapped her. Tears welled up in her eyes. "It's not serious, Jake. I swear." "How long, Emily?" She looked down, ashamed. "A couple of weeks." Her answer was a gunshot to the heart. Is it him? I asked quietly. Is Mike the ex? Her silence said it all. I couldn't look at her anymore. I turned, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't be near her. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted with everything, had betrayed me. My entire marriage felt like a cruel joke, and I was the punchline. That night, Emily texted me a dozen times, begging me to come home. She left voicemails, her voice thick with sobs, apologizing over and over, swearing it didn't mean anything. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I spent the night on my buddy Brian's couch, staring at the ceiling, numb to everything. At some point, Brian handed me a beer, and I remember him saying something like, "You'll figure it out, man. You always do." But I didn't feel like I would. I didn't know how I could come back from this. Emily didn't just cheat on me. She shattered me. I didn't go home the next day, or the day after that. Brian didn't ask a lot of questions, but he knew something had happened. I guess the hollow look on my face said it all. He didn't press, though. He just handed me another beer and let me sit in silence. Meanwhile, Emily blew up my phone. Texts, voicemails. Please. She begged me to come home, to talk to her, to give her a chance to explain. I ignored every word until day 3, when I finally listened to one of her voicemails. Her voice cracked as she spoke, her breathing ragged like she'd been crying for hours. "Jake, please, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. It wasn't worth it. He wasn't worth it. I love you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please come home. Please, let me fix this." I sat there on Brian's couch, clutching my phone, my throat tight. I wanted to hate her. I tried to hate her, but deep down I still loved her. That was the worst part of it. Loving someone who'd hurt you so deeply feels like a betrayal of yourself. But I couldn't turn it off. Finally, I cracked. I needed answers. I needed to know why. When I walked back into our house, it didn't feel like home. The air was thick and heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. Emily was sitting on the edge of the couch, her face pale, eyes red and swollen. When she saw me, she shot up, taking a hesitant step toward me. "Jake, sit," I said quietly, my voice flat. She sat. I stayed standing. I wanted the upper hand, even if it was just symbolic. "Tell me everything," I said. "No lies.
No excuses.
Just the truth." Emily wiped her face with her sleeve, her hands shaking as she tried to find her words. "I ran into him a couple months ago, at a coffee shop." "Mike?" I asked coldly. She nodded. "Yeah, my ex." The name stung. I pictured him sitting in that diner, smug and confident, like he'd won something that belonged to me. He reached out afterward just to talk. I thought it was harmless at first. Just catching up. Her voice wavered. But it wasn't. He made me feel, I don't know, like I was young again. Like I was still that carefree, wild version of myself. And I let it get out of control. Her words sliced through me. "And you thought sleeping with him would help?" She flinched hard, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't like that. We didn't." She caught herself, closing her eyes. "We kissed. That's all. I swear, Jake. I swear on my life. It didn't go further." I wanted to believe her. I didn't know if I could. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking for the first time. Why wasn't I enough? Her face crumpled, and for a second, I saw the woman I fell in love with. The one who made me laugh, who held my hand in the darkest moments of my life, who promised me forever. "It's not that you're not enough," she whispered. "It was me. I was stupid and selfish, and I didn't think about how much I could hurt you. I didn't think about what we could lose." I sat down on the armrest of the chair across from her, my hands buried in my hair. My mind was spinning. I wanted to yell. I wanted to smash something. But instead, I just said, "Do you love him?" "No," she said quickly, desperately.
No, Jaque.
"I don't love him. I never did. He's part of my past. You're my future." Her words hung in the air, heavy and fragile, as if one wrong move would shatter them into dust. I stayed in the house that night, but I didn't sleep in our bed. Couldn't. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Emily crying herself to sleep in the other room. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Emily tried everything to make it right, leaving me notes, cooking my favorite meals, asking me to talk to her. Some days I couldn't look at her without seeing Mike's face. Other days, I wanted to pull her into my arms and pretend none of this had happened. The truth is, forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. There's 1,000 small decisions made every single day. And for some reason I kept making them. Maybe because I loved her too much to let go. Maybe because I couldn't imagine life without her. Or maybe because I still believed in the woman I married, even after she let me down. Took weeks, months really, but I forgave her. We went to counseling, poured our hearts out, tore down every wall we'd built. Emily worked harder than I ever thought she could. She showed me every day that she wanted to earn my trust back. And slowly, the pieces of us started to come together again. We survived it. We were stronger, I thought. Better. For 10 years, we rebuilt what Emily's betrayal had broken. At first, it felt impossible. Some days I didn't think I'd make it. But over time, trust returned, not fully, maybe never fully, but enough. Emily worked tirelessly to prove herself. She didn't guard her phone anymore. She gave up late nights out, and she poured herself into our marriage with a dedication that almost scared me. We took vacations, bought a house, and talked about starting a family. Life became good again. Those 10 years were filled with birthdays and anniversaries, inside jokes and quiet evenings on the porch. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but I believed in us. We were the couple who survived the unthinkable. I wore that like a badge of honor. Then the cracks started again. It was subtle at first, like before. Déjà vu is a sick feeling when you've been here once already. Emily started to drift. She'd seemed distracted mid-conversation, scrolling her phone with that faraway look in her eyes. I noticed her smile was different too, forced like a mask. "You've been quiet lately?" I said one evening as we ate dinner. "Is everything okay?" She smiled weakly. "Work's just stressful." "I'm fine, Jake." "Really?" The problem was, I wanted to believe her. After all, she'd worked so hard to earn back my trust. I didn't want to tear open old wounds just because I was feeling paranoid. But then came the late nights. She started staying out late for work events or catch-ups with friends I didn't recognize. I wanted to confront her, but I was scared of what I'd hear. I told myself I was overthinking, that history wasn't repeating itself. Then came the moment that shattered everything. One Saturday, she told me she had to attend a company workshop in another city, an overnight stay. I felt that nagging ache deep in my chest, but I swallowed it down and told her to have a good trip. I wanted to trust her. I really did. But around midnight, I woke up to a feeling I couldn't explain. I stared at the ceiling, my gut twisting, until I grabbed my phone. Without thinking, I opened the location-sharing app we'd installed years ago, an unspoken compromise in the wake of her first betrayal. Her dot wasn't in the city. It was 3 towns over in a suburban neighborhood. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, staring at that little dot on the map. She's lying to me, again. My hands shook as I grabbed my keys. I don't remember the drive. I only remember the fury and disbelief swirling in my head like a storm. It wasn't until I pulled up to the house, a nondescript single story with a car I didn't recognize parked in the driveway, that everything became real. I turned off the engine and sat there, staring at the house, willing myself to breathe. I didn't want to know the truth, but I already did. I knocked on the door. It was probably the hardest thing I'd ever done, my fist landing against the wood with a sound that echoed through my skull. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the door cracked open, and a man appeared. I'll never forget his face. Confused, slightly annoyed, maybe in his late 30s. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Is Emily here?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. His face shifted. He looked at me closely, his brow furrowing, and then he turned his head toward the hallway behind him. Em?" I heard her before I saw her. "Who is it?" she called lightly, her voice carrying down the hall. Then she appeared. My wife. She stepped into view, wearing a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt that wasn't hers. Her hair was a mess, like she'd been asleep or... I couldn't let myself think about it. When she saw me standing there, her face went white. "Jake!" she breathed. I didn't say a word. I just stared at her. I could see the panic in her eyes, the way she instinctively glanced at the man beside her. That glance was everything. Confirmed it. "Who is he?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, She swallowed hard, stepping toward me. "It's not what you think. Stop lying to me, Emily," I snapped. My voice was loud enough to make the guy shift uncomfortably. I turned to him. "How long has this been going on?" "Hey man, maybe you should leave," he said, holding up his hands like I was the problem. "How long?" I roared. Emily stepped between us, tears streaming down her face. "Jake, please, I can explain. Just let me talk." "You don't get to explain this time," I said bitterly, shaking my head. "Not again." I turned and walked back to my car. She followed me, shouting my name, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. I drove home in a fog of rage and devastation. When I got back to the house, the home we'd built together, I fell apart. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of believing we'd beaten the odds, all shattered in an instant. Emily came home the next morning. She walked in quietly, like a ghost, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. I'd been up all night, numb and staring into nothing. "Why?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Her face crumpled. "I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with me. That's not good enough." She wiped her tears. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Jake. I swear I didn't. I thought I'd changed. I thought we had changed. You promised me," I said, my voice breaking. "You promised you'd never hurt me like this again. I forgave you. I trusted you, Emily. How could you do this?" "I don't deserve you," she whispered, her voice so low I almost didn't hear it. "You're right," I said. "You don't." For the first time, I knew it was over. There was no counseling, no second chances, no coming back. Emily had betrayed me again, and I couldn't survive picking up the pieces a second time. "Jake," she choked out, reaching for my hand. Pulled away. "I want a divorce." Those 4 words cut through the air like a blade. Emily sobbed, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I walked out of the room, out of the house, out of the life we'd built together. The weeks after I told Emily I wanted a divorce felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out from behind a glass wall. The house was quiet in a way I didn't recognize. No hum of Emily singing softly while she cooked. No light patter of her footsteps moving through the hall. She moved out quickly, taking only the essentials. A few weeks later, I came home to find her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, along with a handwritten note.
I'm sorry, Jake.
For everything. You deserved better than me. That was it. No long explanations. No pleading for another chance. Just an apology I couldn't do anything with. The house felt like a tomb. Our memories were everywhere. The coffee mugs we picked out together. The dent in the wall from where we accidentally knocked over a bookshelf. The blanket she'd wrapped around us during so many movie nights. I wanted to burn it all down just to stop feeling her ghost in every room. Instead, I started packing. I couldn't stay in the house we'd built together. I found a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, just enough for me to have a place to sleep and breathe. Moving in felt like closing a chapter one wasn't ready to end. In the months that followed, I fell into a routine. Wake up, go to work, eat dinner alone, and fall asleep on the couch with the TV on. I didn't go out much. Friends would check in, invite me to grab a drink or hit the gym, but I always found an excuse to stay home. The truth was, I didn't know who I was without Emily. It wasn't until Brian, my oldest friend, dragged me out to a baseball game that I realized how much I'd let myself shut down. I was sitting there, staring blankly at the field, when Brian elbowed me. "You're still alive, man. You've got to start acting like it." His words stuck with me.
Ide surviva. Anti.
Emily had shattered me, but I wasn't broken beyond repair. I still had a chance to build something new, something that was just mine. So I started small. I signed up for a gym membership. I said yes to dinners with friends. I picked up running again, something I hadn't done since college. At first, it felt like going through the motions, but eventually, I began to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of pushing my body, of seeing small improvements, of feeling like me again. One Saturday, while grabbing coffee after a run, I bumped into a woman named Rachel. I say bumped because I literally ran into her, spilling half her drink down her arm. I expected her to curse me out, but instead, she laughed. "Guess I'll be smelling like caramel macchiato all day," she said, grinning. We ended up sitting together, talking for hours. Rachel was easy to be around. She asked questions, listened without judgment, and didn't pry when I mentioned my divorce in passing. It was the first time in a long time I felt a flicker of something I thought was gone forever. I wasn't ready to jump into anything, and Rachel wasn't rushing me. But for the first time I thought maybe, just maybe, I could open myself up again. A year after the divorce was finalized, Emily reached out. It was just a text. "I hope you're doing okay. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore her. She didn't deserve my time or my energy anymore. But another part of me, the part that once loved her with everything I had, felt like I owed it to myself to hear her out. We met at a park on a cold afternoon. She looked different, smaller, somehow, like the weight of her guilt had finally settled on her shoulders. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly, pulling her coat tighter around her. "I almost didn't," I admitted. She nodded, her eyes on the ground. I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I don't think I ever really understood how much I hurt you until after you were gone." "Why'd you do it?" I asked, the question I'd never truly gotten an answer to. Emily sighed, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "I don't know. I wish I could give you a reason that makes sense. I think I was always looking for something. Some thrill, some escape, that I didn't even realize I already had with you. And I ruined it. I ruined us." I watched her, searching for the anger I thought I'd feel. But it wasn't there. All I felt was a strange sense of peace. "I loved you," I said quietly. "You were my whole world, Emily." "I know," she whispered. "And I'm so sorry." For the first time, I didn't need her apology. I didn't need answers. I realized I'd already let her go. "Take care of yourself," I said, standing up. Emily wiped her eyes and nodded. "You too, Jake. You deserve to be happy." As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in years. Life moved forward. It always does. I spent more time with my friends. More time exploring the parts of myself I'd buried under the weight of my marriage. Rachel and I stayed in touch, our friendship growing naturally over time. She never pushed me for more, and that's what I needed. One evening, as we sat by the lake with takeout and cheap wine, Rachel looked at me and said, "You seem different these days." "Different how?" I asked. "Like you're finally happy." I smiled, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I think I am." And I was. For the first time in years, I was happy. Not because of someone else, but because I'd found my own peace. It's funny how life can break you and rebuild you all at once. Emily's betrayals taught me the hardest lesson of all, that love can't exist without trust, and once trust is broken, it's nearly impossible to piece it back together. But they also taught me that I am stronger than I ever knew. I walked through fire and I came out the other side. Sometimes, I still think about the life I thought I'd have, the marriage that fell apart. But I don't regret loving Emily. She was part of my story, a painful, complicated chapter, but not the whole book. And as I sit here now, looking at Rachel laughing over a terrible joke I made, I realize that love doesn't always look like you expect it to. Sometimes it's quieter, slower, and built on the ashes of the past. But it's no less beautiful. This time, I'm ready for it. Thank you for going through this with me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new exciting and interesting stories.